Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at a few editorials, columns and other articles that are relevant for mains. We have a series of articles and an editorial in today's newspaper dealing with the US elections and the unprecedented siege at the US Capitol. The 2020 presidential elections of the United States has left the country deeply polarized, and it led to an unprecedented attack against the US Capitol, which is the equivalent of the Indian Parliament that houses the US Congress and the US Senate. So essentially, the US Capitol building, depicted in this image over here, represents the very soul of American democracy and is nothing short of being the temple of American democracy, just like the Indian Parliament is to the Indian democracy. So the very symbol of American democracy was brought under attack by a group of pro-Trump supporters on a very crucial day in the American presidential election process. See, the 6th of Jan is a very important date in the American election process because it is on this date that the US Congress assembles at the US Capitol to tally the Electoral College votes and certify the elections and formally declare the president-elect who would be sworn in on the 20th of Jan. The 20th of Jan marks the inauguration day, and it is on this day that the outgoing administration provides for a smooth and peaceful transition of power to the incoming new administration, which is the very hallmark of a democracy. See, the United States is often referred to as one of the world's oldest democracies, and it is also considered to be one of the most stable democracies in the world. And one of the hallmark symbols of a stable and functioning democracy is that the outgoing administration always ensures a smooth and peaceful transition of power into the hands of the new incoming administration. Traditionally, the United States has always witnessed a smooth and peaceful transition of power, and this is what made the US a stable democracy. Previously, the inauguration day and the tallying of Electoral College votes by the US Congress was more of a formality because the American presidential election process had never been subverted in the past, and it had never been challenged on the basis of lies and conspiracy theories. But during the latest presidential elections, we have witnessed the unprecedented under the hands of Donald Trump. Earlier, when Donald Trump had won the 2016 presidential elections, his political campaign had carefully exploited the economic problems and social problems that were facing the United States. And based on this, he had built a populist campaign targeted against the failures of the previous governments. This populist campaign, which was largely built on the social media through fake news, propaganda and disinformation, had managed to exploit the insecurities, that is the economic and social insecurities of the average American. But even after assuming power, Donald Trump displayed a similar liking towards lies and conspiracy theories. And throughout his first term, the concerns around his state of mind and mental health were so serious that several officials of the US administration resigned by citing that the president had become delusional, and also based on his inclination to deliberately promote propaganda and fake news. Several leading psychiatrists and mental health experts in the country had written an unprecedented petition to the US Congress by highlighting that the president's behavior was bordering on delusion and narcissism. And it is the same concerns that were flagged previously that has come to disrupt the 2020 presidential elections, which in turn has led to the destabilization of the American democracy. During the 2020 presidential campaign as well, Donald Trump was seen to be propagating lies, conspiracy theories and propaganda. And as the election process began in October and November, Donald Trump started making baseless allegations of electoral fraud, especially with regard to mail-in votes. And even though these fraud allegations were dismissed by the election authorities and by the Supreme Court of the United States, Donald Trump and his campaign continued promoting lies and conspiracy theories, and eventually he even managed to instigate an insurrection against the American democracy. So on the 6th of Jan, as the US lawmakers and congressmen had assembled at the US Congress at the Capitol building, a large mob that was instigated by Trump's speech and his statements led an attack against the US Capitol building, and they managed to lay siege to the very temple of American democracy. This even led to violence and riots and a number of protesters even managed to enter the building, while the US Congress was looking to certify the Electoral College tally and declare the president-elect. So this attempted siege of the US Capitol building, led by Trump supporters, has been labelled by a number of constitutional experts and political experts as nothing short of an insurrection and an attempted coup. This unfortunate incident represents the gravest assault on American democracy, and it not only affects the global standing of the United States as a stable democracy, but it is also likely to have an impact on democracies around the world. Now, this is where you need to understand what is an insurrection. See, an insurrection is basically a refusal to obey the orders that is coming from an established authority. An insurrection is essentially an organized rebellion in which the rebels are trying to wrest control from the existing authority. The objective of an insurrection is to destroy or take over the position of an established authority, and this includes the government, the office of the governor, the president, or any other authority established by law. In an insurrection, two different types of behavior can be noticed. On one hand, an insurrection could be a peaceful movement that employs only non-violent methods. For example, civil disobedience, civil resistance, non-violent resistance. In a way, India's freedom struggle and national movement, which included aspects of civil disobedience and civil resistance against British authority, was a form of an insurrection. Because India's freedom struggle was largely non-violent and it adopted civil disobedience as a tool. But however, insurrection can also turn violent. Organized protesters can engage in mindless acts of violence against the established authority in order to wrest control. And examples include the Iranian Revolution of 1979, the Arab Spring that spread across Middle East, North Africa region from 2011 onwards, etc. So clearly, by looking at the definition of insurrection, we can say that what happened at the US Capitol was nothing short of an insurrection because the mob carried out violence and riots, and it openly challenged the election results that were certified democratically, and it was an attempt to wrest control from the existing authority based on lies and conspiracy theories. This was no doubt a major security failure as well for the American security and intelligence agencies, because there were sufficient warnings and prior intelligence available to indicate that an organized attempt was being made, particularly on the social media, to disrupt the democratic election process. Generally, whenever a transition of power is taking place and when elections are conducted, the security agencies are always in a state of high alert, and they even make preparations to deal with any possible contingencies. This is true in the case of India as well, because the Election Commission of India ensures that the entire electoral process is conducted peacefully by closely working with the security forces. So the security breach at the US Capitol, that too on a day when the election results were being formalized, represents a major security failure, and it also highlights the organized attempt that was being made on social media by Trump's campaign with the support of several far right-wing groups in order to disrupt and subvert the democratic election process. In fact, this insurrection attempt is directly linked to rising radicalism in the United States, which is an outcome of the false allegations, propaganda and fake news that Trump has promoted through various media platforms including the social media, and alarmingly, he has even used his official social media accounts to deliberately promote fake news, disinformation, propaganda and even hatred in the American society. This has directly led to the deep polarization of the American society on political and racial lines, and it has contributed to rising radicalism led by white supremacists. Over the years, Donald Trump has extended open support, especially through social media, to far right-wing white supremacist organizations, which are known to target racial minorities and ethnic minorities. One such example is a white supremacist group known as Proud Boys, which is a far right-wing organization. Similarly, Donald Trump has even supported baseless conspiracy theories such as QAnon, which started off as a fringe conspiracy theory on social media, but it ended up being mainstreamed thanks to the open support given by Donald Trump to these fake conspiracy theories. In fact, The conspiracy promoted by QAnon members may sound unbelievable because the members of QAnon believe that Donald Trump is a secret warrior working to protect the United States from Democrats and from several celebrities and businessmen who have gained power by drinking the blood of trafficked children. Like I said, it sounds unbelievable and ridiculous, but over the last couple of years, Donald Trump himself has supported these conspiracy theories, and this is how QAnon became mainstreamed. The members of QAnon were also seen as pro-Trump supporters, and they even started organizing politically on social media, and this has even contributed to political violence in the real world. So the mob that attacked the US Capitol and staged this insurrection comprised of white supremacists, members of QAnon, and far right-wing extremist organizations such as Proud Boys. In fact, one of the most alarming developments during these riots at the US Capitol was the display of the Confederate flag by one of the protesters inside the US Capitol building. Now, this is a very alarming development because the Confederate flag is a symbol of fascism and racism. It traces back its origin to the American Civil War fought between 1861 and 65, when the southern conservative states, known as the Confederate States, staged a rebellion against the Union, that is, against the United States of America and its constitutional democracy, in order to retain and continue their pro-slavery policies. These developments also marked the decline of the United States as a global superpower. Over the last decade and a half, the American economy is on the decline, and the global domination of the US dollar as the reserve currency is being openly challenged by countries such as China, Russia, and even by the exponential growth of cryptocurrencies. Along with this, we have the complete mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic by the Donald Trump administration and the complete erosion of America's commitment and support to global multilateral institutions, because the Trump administration took several steps to weaken the global trading regime created by the WTO, and he also unilaterally withdrew the US from several UN institutions such as the UN Human Rights Council, UNESCO, etc. Under Donald Trump, the US also quit the Paris Agreement of the Climate Change Convention and thereby weakened America's commitment to fight against climate change and global warming. Under Donald Trump, the US not only violated its commitments to the Climate Change Convention, but the Trump administration even went on to claim that climate change was just a conspiracy theory. On similar lines, Trump unilaterally withdrew the US from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or also known as the Iran nuclear deal, thereby raising tensions with Iran, which almost brought the two countries to the brink of war. While these events mark the external decline of America's superpower status, internally the weakening of its democracy marks the declining influence of the United States. The rise of white supremacy is one of the major concerns because this has directly contributed to hatred and polarization in the American society, and we have witnessed an increasing number of assaults on the minorities. Over the last few years, racial discrimination in the US has increased, and the blacks in particular have been at the receiving end, as witnessed during the Black Lives Matter protests. The Trump administration also took a very conservative stand against immigrants, and he chose to directly target immigrants from South Asia, Hispanics, and he also heavily politicized the problem of illegal migration across the Mexico border. Political experts agree that these external and internal developments mark the complete erosion of American democracy because it betrays America's commitment for promoting human rights, for promoting democratic values such as liberty and equality, and the increasing number of civil unrest incidents accompanied with the unsubstantiated claims of Trump of electoral fraud and his repeated refusal to concede the elections eventually led to this insurrection attempt that several experts are even referring to as an attempted coup. Now, this places the US in a very uncomfortable position because for decades, the US has been preaching democracy to the world. The latest riots at the US Capitol are so serious that even America's allies, especially from Europe, they have criticized the developments, and the European Union and countries such as France, UK and Germany, they have openly criticized Trump for subverting democracy. Ironically, the US has always targeted several countries such as China and Venezuela for subverting and eroding democracy, as seen during the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. But the latest developments in the US has given an opportunity for countries such as China and Venezuela to preach democracy to the United States itself by calling upon the US to protect the sanctity of democratic elections. Even in India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is seen to have a personal relationship with Donald Trump, has expressed distress at these developments, which clearly shows that even India and the Prime Minister are looking to distance themselves from Donald Trump. But however, this is where a problem arises for India, and especially this could have an impact on the future of India-US relations. Because see, traditionally, India has always enjoyed bipartisan support, and be it a US government led by Democrats or Republicans, the India-US relationship has always received a very high priority. But over the last 4 years, we have witnessed an unprecedented development in Indian diplomacy, where the Indian government had officially started endorsing Trump's electoral campaign as witnessed during the Howdy Modi event and the Namaste Trump event. Several foreign policy experts and even former diplomats of India had criticized the Indian government for politically endorsing Donald Trump's campaign, because that would amount to India extending diplomatic support to one particular party against the other. These developments have even led to a lot of polarization within the Indian diaspora, especially amongst Indian Americans, and it has been observed that a section of Indian Americans have even expressed open support to the Trump's campaign. While there is nothing wrong with this, the display of an Indian flag by few Indian Americans during the Capitol riots is definitely a cause for concern and alarm, because all these developments would have been noticed by the incoming Biden administration. When Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government were seen to be politically endorsing Trump's campaign, the Democrat Party and presidential candidate Joe Biden, they had expressed their displeasure towards India. So this is likely to have an impact on the future of the India-US relationship. And even though the Biden administration is going to continue the strategic partnership on critical issues such as the Kashmir dispute, human rights situation in India, question of religious freedom, and controversial laws such as the Citizenship Amendment Act, on these issues, the Biden administration might look to target India. The editorial on page number 6 also takes a similar stand and labels this violence seen at the US Capitol as an attempted coup. The impact of these events on democracy around the world and the gravity of the situation can be understood by looking at the fact that almost all social media giants, including Facebook, Twitter, and the others, they have blocked Trump's official accounts, and some of them have even permanently removed Trump from their platforms. Because the post that Donald Trump was sharing over the last few months was in direct violation of the policies of social media companies, and as soon as he started making baseless claims of electoral fraud, Facebook and Twitter, they started attaching a warning message to these posts of Donald Trump, and they even removed some of them as it was seen to be promoting fake news and lies about allegations of electoral fraud. But now that his social media posts have directly instigated violence at the US Capitol, it marks a direct infringement of the policies of social media companies, and they have not just blocked Trump, but some of them have even permanently removed his accounts. These developments go on to show how deeply polarized is the American society on political and racial lines. So the incoming Joe Biden administration will have a tough task at hand in order to restore American democracy. Because the developments over the last few years clearly mark an erosion in America's commitment towards democratic values, and it has taken the shine out of the so-called American dream. So this ongoing decline of America as a superpower, as a result of its economic decline and democratic decline, is definitely going to have a global impact, because this could set the stage for rise in autocracies and dictatorships around the world. In the coming years, as China overtakes the US as the leading economy of the world and firmly establishes itself as a global power, the simultaneous decline of the US would be marked by an American retreat in global geopolitics, and this power vacuum will be duly filled by China. And China, being an autocratic country in itself, would further weaken democracy around the world, and these alarming developments should serve as a wake-up call to India. If the American democracy was able to overcome the threat posed by Donald Trump, it was because the country still had a few strong democratic institutions. This included a few sections of American media, its judiciary, a strong civil society and a strong opposition, which together managed to counter Trump's assault on American democracy. So in India as well, one should not take democracy for granted, and hence the government, the media, the judiciary, the civil society and the opposition, they all should work in tandem to strengthen our democratic institutions. Next, on page number 7, we have a related column that deals with disinformation and fake news. See, the large-scale propagation of disinformation and fake news, particularly on social media, is often being referred to as an infodemic. Basically, it is similar to a pandemic where fake news spreads rapidly in the society, leading to massive polarization in the society and subversion of democracy. See, disinformation, propaganda and fake news, they have all existed since many centuries, even when we had traditional forms of media. But social media has been a game changer for the spread of fake news and conspiracy theories, primarily because of its reach, which has been powered by the deep penetration of smart devices and internet. So this gives social media platforms tremendous reach to millions of people around the world. And accompanied with this reach, all the data that they harvest could be easily manipulated and exploited in order to carry out social engineering. That is, to engineer the society on several divides that are already prevalent in the society. This includes religious divide, racial divide, ethnic divide, and these divides could be exploited on the social media in order to polarize the society. Then through social engineering carried out through social media, the opinion and the behavior of the individual could also be modified, and this eventually leads to the subversion of democracy. So who are the actors involved in promoting fake news, disinformation and propaganda? First, we have the political parties and maybe the government of a country. They would engage in the spread of propaganda and disinformation in order to manipulate political opinion of the subjects. And this is primarily done with the intent of subverting elections and with the intent of changing public opinion on controversial subjects. Then even hostile countries, particularly through their intelligence agencies, they can wage a covert war against a target country through social engineering. They can exploit the existing divides in the society and further destabilize the country, and they could even rely upon proxy elements for this purpose, such as non-state actors including terrorist outfits. Even terror groups are known to engage in social engineering in order to promote radicalism and recruitment, and a classic example is the penetration of ISIS ideology on social media. Then even private organizations could engage in social engineering by promoting targeted propaganda and disinformation in order to alter consumer behavior and consumption patterns for the purpose of profit. So in this age of disinformation, how do you deal with this infodemic? The answer lies in basic fact-checking. As disinformation has evolved, even fact-checking is evolving. And even though it is very hard to combat fake news, especially on social media, thorough fact-checking by media outlets and usage of technology and AI algorithms by social media giants to filter out fake news, and efforts by government and the civil society to promote responsible behavior on social media would be helpful in tackling the menace of fake news through fact-checking. Next, on page number 6, we have another editorial dealing with the avian influenza outbreak that has hit India. But we have already covered this topic in complete detail on the 6th of January. So kindly go back and watch this analysis and you can go through the editorial once. See, the crux of the editorial is that the strain that has affected India is the H5N8 strain, and it is asking the government to effectively implement the National Avian Influenza Plan, which was launched in 2015, in order to prevent any possible transmission of the strain to humans. Even though it's quite rare for the avian influenza virus to jump from birds and other animals to human beings, such instances have been recorded in other countries, and it's quite possible that the influenza type A virus could undergo further mutations and possibly jump to humans as well. So the editorial is asking the government to proactively implement the National Avian Influenza Plan in order to prevent any potential pandemic in the future. Now let's look at a couple of articles that provide us important updates with regard to the state of the Indian economy. According to this article on page number 1, the government expects India's GDP to contract by 7.7% for this financial year. See, in 2019-20, India's economy had expanded by 4.2%. This was already seen as a slowdown in the GDP growth of the country because of the structural issues that are plaguing the Indian economy. But the breakout of the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdown has dealt a double blow to the Indian economy. So it was estimated by several agencies and institutions that India's GDP growth for this financial year could be minus 9%. But thanks to the quick recovery that the Indian economy is showing over the last few months, the National Statistical Office estimates that India's real GDP for this financial year could be minus 7.7% instead of the earlier minus 9%. Then according to this article on page number 14, India's fiscal deficit may cross 7% of its GDP. This is a direct result of the slowdown in revenue collection because of the pandemic and the lockdown, and this is way higher than the fiscal deficit target that is laid out under the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Now let's take up a few articles that are important for prelims. According to this article on page number 9, opposition parties in Haryana, they have pointed out that the state's Panchayati Raj Act and its recent amendment is unconstitutional and it violates the provisions of Article 243D. See, Article 243D deals with Panchayats and it provides for reservation of seats in Panchayats. Accordingly, reservation has been provided to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. This reservation is applicable for all Panchayats and even to the offices of the chairpersons, and the number of seats reserved are in the same proportion as that of the population of these communities in the Panchayat area. On similar lines, reservation has also been provided for women, and Article 243D states that not less than 1/3 reservation would be provided for women in Panchayats and to the offices of the chairpersons. So according to this article, the minimum reservation of seats for women is 1/3 of the seats. But however, the Panchayati Raj Act of Haryana, which was recently amended, places a cap on the reservation of women at 50% in these local bodies. And this prevents the women from contesting in the remaining 50% of the seats. Hence, the opposition parties, they have written to the governor alleging that the Amendment Act passed to the Haryana Panchayati Raj Act is unconstitutional and violative of Article 243D. Now let's take up an article from page number 9. According to this article, the Chief of the Indian Air Force has visited Arunachal Pradesh and he has evaluated the preparedness at the forward air bases and advanced landing grounds that serve a strategic purpose as far as the forward deployment of the Indian Armed Forces is concerned against China. See, advanced landing grounds or ALGs are basically partially prepared airstrips which can be used to deploy heavy transport aircrafts and as well as fighter jets and helicopters if required. Usually these ALGs are built in forward positions closer to the border areas and they help in making the remote areas accessible, which helps in faster deployment. Several such ALGs were built by the British during the World War in the northeast of India, and the Indian Air Force has started reactivating some of these advanced landing grounds, and it is also trying to build new ALGs across the China border, including in Ladakh, because these partially prepared airstrips require minimum infrastructure, and one such ALG has already come up at Vijayanagar, located near the border of China and Myanmar. Till date, around 6 such ALGs have been operationalized by the Indian Air Force, and since they require minimum infrastructure, they can be prepared and built in a very short period of time with limited expenses, and it helps the Indian Air Force to deploy heavy transport aircraft such as the strategic heavy lift C-17 Globemaster and the tactical C-130J Super Hercules that India has procured from the US. They help in deploying troops and providing logistical support and supplies to the forces that are deployed in the forward areas facing Chinese border. Now the IAF has proposed 2 more advanced landing grounds in the West Kameng district and in the Dibang Valley located closer to the border with Tibet. Now let's take up an article from page number 10. The Prime Minister has flagged off a section of the freight corridor and he has labelled it as a big boost to the Indian economy. See, this map over here depicts the ambitious dedicated freight corridor project of India, which is partially funded by Japan. This dedicated freight corridor project has 2 components, that is the western section and the eastern section. The western section of the dedicated freight corridor connects the JNPT port at Mumbai with Delhi, and the eastern section of the DFC connects Ludhiana in Punjab with the ports in Kolkata. So along the entire stretch of these freight corridors, industrial clusters and logistics hubs will be built to speed up the transportation of freight and cargo in order to promote industrial development. Similar corridors have been planned for the east coast of India, for the southern part of India as well, that connects Goa, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. And along with this, a east-west and a north-south dedicated freight corridor have also been planned. Next, we have an article on page number 14, according to which the World Food Price Index, which is brought out by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, global food prices have increased for the 7th consecutive month, and this has led to food inflation around the world and led to food shortages as well. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: the United States is a power on the decline. Its handling of the pandemic, weakening dollar, erosion of democratic values has eroded its standing as a global superpower. Evaluate its impact on constitutional democracy around the world. The second question: disinformation is increasing and becoming harder to combat, but fact-checking too is evolving. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.